Hey guys, how you doing? This is Podward State. I'm Matt Paolizzi.
Sam Brungo.
And today we are joined once again by sports editor Will Pegler. Will, how you doing?
How's it going, guys? Thanks again for having me. Good to be back.
Yep, and today we're talking again more football. We had a devastating loss to Ohio State the previous weekend and looking forward to this weekend against Maryland. But let's start right away with Ohio State. Will, you were actually there in attendance at Beaver Stadium. That must have been quite an experience. It was really just journalists and team staffers. How was that experience being in an almost dead Beaver Stadium?
Yeah, man. I mean, it was weird. Was expected to be like the biggest home game of the year. Obviously, would have been the whiteout, and it was basically empty. There was behind Penn State's bench, away from the press box, there was like family members of the coaches and the student athletes. And Ohio State had some too, but that was it, man. I mean, it couldn't have been more than a couple hundred people in the stands, in my opinion, and then everybody in the press box and different staffers. So it was strange. I mean, Beaver Stadium did a pretty good job pumping in noise for big plays. The cutouts were pretty like tastefully done. I like that. I thought that was cool. And then the thing that they did with the S zone was awesome. They had all the seniors and different graduate students like right there, had their signatures on there. So it was cool. I mean, it was about as cool as it could be, all things considered, without being able to have 110,000 fans in there. But strange atmosphere and kind of a strange game.
Yeah, because you think for the whiteout especially, like that's a massive home field advantage that Penn State normally has in those big games. That's, I'd say definitely made a difference over the past few ones, even though the record hasn't shown that for Penn State. Do you think they were able to make as close to an authentic whiteout experience just with the noise, or was there still the fact that there was nobody, was that still the major factor and kind of wiped out any sort of advantage they try to give?
Yeah, it's tough. It's definitely, there's no way to make up for the actual whiteout. James Franklin talked about it a little bit. Like, I think you said we're kidding ourselves if we think we can actually replicate that atmosphere. So they pumped in noise, but normally at the whiteout, like the stadium will start shaking at big plays like that. And there's really no way to replicate it. So I think Penn State did really miss that on big, plays that could have been big, like momentum turns when the stadium really erupts. They were totally missing that. We'll get into it more kind of in the analysis, but out of halftime when they scored on that opening drive and we're down 8, that's a moment right there where the stadium would have erupted, and I think the defense could have really fed off of some of that energy, but they were totally missing that. And I think there's no doubt that probably did have some effect on the game and on the play a little bit.
Yeah, and to think too that we only lost by 13 points, that definitely could have been a factor that could have brought us back into a one possession game or potentially even winning that game. So that is definitely a big loss, I think, for Penn State too. So, Will, what are your initial reactions to the loss and how Penn State played?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough game overall, but to keep in mind, I don't think most people did not expect Penn State to win that one. I mean, Ohio State's obviously one of the best, if not the best, college football teams in the country. Justin Fields is probably the best player in the country besides Trevor Lawrence, in my opinion, or one of the best. And he proved it, man. I mean, he threw for 4 touchdowns. He only had 6 incompletions. He tore it up. He tore up Penn State's defense. Obviously, that was the biggest storyline. I think Brent Pry and the rest of the defense was, fairly getting criticized. The secondary had a tough night, but it's tough. I mean, that team is unbelievable. It's Ohio State. They're an unbelievable football team. The fact of the matter is they're just more talented. They just have too many guys on offense. And I think if they play that game 10 times, Ohio State wins it 10 times. They're just a better team. And like I said, without any home field advantage, it really didn't feel like Penn State ever had much of a chance in that one, besides maybe when they got within 8 out of halftime. But right away, Ohio State drove right down the field and retook its lead. So they pretty much shut down any hope that Penn State had throughout the game.
The thing about Penn State, though, is, even I know going into it myself when I was watching it, I wasn't expecting a Penn State win at all. But there are definitely some moments that sort of, raised your excitement a tiny bit, like, oh, there might be a chance. I think towards the end in the fourth quarter, the Penn State as a second half team narrative has been consistent over the past few years, and they definitely started getting rolling. I mean, that they had that one big touchdown to start things off in the second half. But then, of course, that last pick in the fourth quarter kind of sealed things. Any potential comeback was kind of nicked. But in terms of things that went well for Penn State, is there anything that Penn State can build on from this game to go into Maryland next week?
Yeah, I mean, you said that second half offensive performance was awesome. They really started taking deep shots. Besides Sean Clifford's interception, like you said, to end the game. He really had a strong second half after a brutal first half. I mean, they only had 75 yards in the first half, 4 in the second quarter, and really couldn't get anything going on offense. But Jahan Dotson became that dude in the second half. I mean, Clifford kept going to him. Obviously, the two biggest plays were that like bobble helmet catch he had to set them up in Ohio State territory, and then immediately after he had that one-handed catch. So that was awesome. I think people should really be excited about him. About Parker Washington, he had himself a nice game. He had 4 catches and made a couple big plays. So on the offensive side of the ball, I think there's definitely some excitement there. In terms of special teams, I thought Jake Pinnicker and Jordan Stout really bounced back. Pinnicker obviously had a tough game against Indiana. He made that one field goal and nailed all of his extra points. So that's pretty much all you can ask from him. And then Stout, guy's a touchback machine. It was touchbacks only. And then obviously he hit that strange 50-yarder right before halftime where everybody went in the locker room, and then the refs decided that Ohio State took a knee with 1 second left. So that was a big play too. I mean, heading into the locker room, Penn State could have kind of looked like it might set itself up for a comeback. Obviously, shortening the lead or tightening the lead right before halftime, and then they got the ball and scored right away out of half. So I think there are a few positives, a lot of negatives, obviously, but still some positives to take away, considering Ohio State's the number 3 team in the country.
As far as negatives go, would you say Penn State's biggest concern right now is their offensive line and their run game?
Two huge ones. The O-line did not have a good night. I mean, Ohio State's got a good defensive line, no doubt, but James Franklin always talks about winning the line of scrimmage on both sides, and they didn't really do that on either side of the ball. Saturday night, Devin Ford really didn't have much room to get going. Sean Clifford really struggled in the first half, and a lot of that was because of the fact that, he was constantly under duress, getting pressured. I think the Buckeyes had 5 sacks, which is not great, and they had a ton of QB hurries too. I mean, he really did not have a ton of time. And running backs too, like you said, they clearly are missing Journey Brown and Noah Kane. There's no getting around that. I mean, those 2 guys were expected to be 2 of the best running backs in the country in the same locker room, and missing both of them is tough. And that's not to take anything away from Devin Ford. I think he's a talented running back, but he's still a young guy, all things considered. He's still only a sophomore. And especially going against a team like Ohio State where your offensive line is really not having a great night, that did not bode well. So, I'm looking for him to maybe have a bounce back performance against Maryland and kind of get his confidence back up and try to utilize the freshmen a little bit more too. Kevon Lee and Kazai Holmes, we really didn't see any of them on Saturday night, which is understandable. It's only their second game, as college players. So tough to put them in the mix right away against Ohio State, but really just a tough situation overall for Penn State at that position group, no doubt.
And that's kind of building off of last year. Really, one of Penn State's strengths last year was the amazing depth they have at the running back position. I mean, you had Noah Kane, Journey Brown, and Devin Ford being able to slot in whenever and wherever. But especially this game, that really hurt them. Suddenly, that depth was taken away, and they kind of had to, they just had a regular running back situation where they had 1 star and a few others, which definitely really hurt them in that retrospect. So moving from the ground to the air, how would you grade Sean Clifford on this game so far? Has he shown any growth?
Again, it was the first half. Like I said, he didn't have a lot of time, but still he did not look great in the first half. He only had 2 completions, and really was not able to find a lot of his receivers. And you can't do that. You can't start out slow against a team like Ohio State if you want any chance at an upset. To his credit, like we were talking about, he turned it on in the second half. He really did. He started to take deep shots. He looked more confident in the pocket. But I think, we're still looking for that full game performance from Sean. And, going against a team like Maryland next week, who, doesn't have a great defense, that he's got a good opportunity to do that in week 3. But obviously starting against teams like Ohio State and Indiana, who's proven to be a solid team, not easy for any quarterback. So I think it's still early to, criticize Clifford too much. I think he's still got a chance to grow and develop in year 2 here. And a weird year 2, obviously only 8 games, only 6 games left to play, not including that, conference championship weekend thing. So tough start, but if he can, put 2 good halves together, I think he's a great, capable starting quarterback, but we have yet to see that right now.
And building off that too, I think that the numbers and his performance doesn't accurately reflect on him as a player and how he's done so far this year, just because obviously, like we've mentioned earlier, like it's just everything has to be clicking for the quarterback to have a great game. I mean, the offensive line wasn't doing anything, the run game wasn't doing anything, and when you're getting hurried and you don't have the option to carry or give it off to a running back, that kind of leaves you with the only thing working was the pass game. And with that, I felt like there were a lot of open drops through the middle of the field, especially in some big situations. I noticed with Pat Fryermuth, especially on that 2-point conversion where it kind of hits him right in the hands, and you got to have those catches. So building off that, if we were to go give 3 stars of the game on each phase of the field, offense, defense, special teams, who would you go with on the offensive side, defensive side, and special teams for Ohio State's game?
Yeah, I mean, offense has to be Jahan Dotson. He dominated. He had 8 catches, triple digits in yardage, 3 huge touchdowns. I mean, obviously that one-handed one, but also too, the first one he had in the second half was huge to get Penn State back in the game. And then his last one on the night, he kind of like not hurtled, but he vaulted his way into the end zone a little bit, which was a great play. He looked awesome. I think, people were waiting I don't know if people were fully confident in him to step up as, Penn State's guy at the wide receiver position. I think he proved that he can do that. Penn State didn't win the game, but doing that against a team like Ohio State, balling out like that, I mean, Jahan Dotson can definitely be the guy on offense. And, like behind him, Keandre Lambert-Smith and Parker Washington, I think it seems like as of now, they're going to get the most usage behind him. And I think they look capable so far as well. So I think there's a lot of excitement there, but Dotson is no doubt the offensive MVP. On defense, I think Antonio Shelton really stepped up. He had a sack. He had 1 tackle for loss for behind the line of scrimmage, obviously on Master Teague. He had a big night, but Antonio Shelton, he made one of the only plays where Penn State stopped him, and then he batted down a pass. So he really had a nice night. Usually a guy who's considered just kind of a lane clogger, a run stopper up the middle. Getting a sack on Justin Fields, that's no small feat. So I think he really played well, and I think that's exciting to see out of a guy who's really a veteran on the defensive side of the ball. And then special teams as well. Got to be Jordan Stout for me. We already talked about it a little bit. Hit the 50-yarder, hit a 56-yard punt. Really didn't make any mistakes punting, doing kickoffs, and obviously he hit his field goal. So I think he's proved he's a capable punter after 4 years of the star Blake Gillikin at that position. I think I'm excited for Jordan Stout at punter. I think he's going to be really sturdy and reliable at that position.
Obviously, I've been seeing in our mentions when we write about football, obviously our following is brutal towards our coaches. So what do you have to say about how our coaches handled their game plan, and especially focusing on our new offensive coordinator, Kirk Soraka, and just how that's starting to shape up? Because he came from Minnesota where they had a big pass offense, and I think we got to see a little bit of that. Maybe it had to do with the fact that our run offense was essentially non-existent. But what are we seeing from him? Is it too early to get off the Kirk train?
Yeah, I mean, on Soraka, our mentions are brutal, no doubt, and people are already calling for his head, which is ridiculous. It's been tough the first 2 games, obviously, but the offense has shown flashes of good things. They really just need to play a full game. The second half, they looked awesome. They started airing it out. Clifford really started to have time, but not to make excuses for him, but when you don't have your 2 guys who are expected to be star running backs, it's pretty hard to draw up an offensive, run scheme. And then, in the pass game, we've already talked about it, but Clifford just didn't have a lot of time against a really talented defensive line. So it's hard to put it all on Soraka and just say, oh, his game plan sucked. It was all bad. Because it wasn't. I mean, in the second half, they did come out firing. I think, for a lot of fans, which I think is a fair criticism. Is just probably be a little more aggressive early. I think people got frustrated with a lot of it was that QB draw that Clifford tried to run a few times, and it just never really worked. And then a lot of sticking to the run game, just kind of waiting for the run game to get going, which is a fair criticism. But also, like I said, you got to try to run the ball. You can't just completely abandon it. So I think Maryland's will be a pretty revealing game for Soraka, just to, going against a questionable defense. I think a lot of fans expect Penn State's offense to, have that game finally here in week 3. I think we can see that. I think we can see the offense hit its stride and, finally play a full game, put up some big numbers and win comfortably here and get back in the W column for once here in 2020 finally.
Something I would consider a must-win game coming up. I mean, an 0-2 start to a season, especially for a prestige team like Penn State, is definitely nothing to be proud of. But again, they haven't had the easiest start. I mean, Indiana has shown themselves to really have one of their best teams over the past, 20, 30 years. And Ohio State is obviously Ohio State. They're always going to be one of the best teams in the country every year, no matter what you do. So would you define this Maryland game as a must-win game for Penn State? And, if they were to start off 0-3, would you consider that the end of the world?
Yeah, it's a problem if Penn State loses this game. No doubt. I mean, you never want to lose to Maryland, to a team they haven't given up a touchdown to in like 4 years. Maybe not that much, but something absurd. They've dominated Maryland the past few years, obviously. To Maryland's credit, they're better this year. They beat Minnesota. I think they have talent on the offensive side of the ball, so I don't think it'll be a maybe as much of a blowout as a lot of fans expect or might expect early here. But yeah, I mean, I think Penn State probably does need to win this game if they want to salvage this 2020 season here. I mean, Penn State could very well go 6-2 the rest of the way and get themselves into a really respectable bowl game if they can gain some confidence back here against Maryland. I think they will. I think they can, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see them back in Beaver Stadium on Saturday, no doubt. Talia Tungavailoa, to his younger brother at quarterback, he balled out against Minnesota, their win week 2. They really struggled against Northwestern. They lost like 42-3. Then they came back out, beat Minnesota by 1 in overtime, put up 45 points. And Talia had 5 touchdowns. He's an exciting quarterback to watch, and I think he could do some nice things against Penn State. It'll be interesting to see how Brent Pry game plans against him. Actually, Tungavailoa was the co-offensive player of the week in the Big Ten, along with Justin Fields. So Penn State's going back to back here with two really good quarterbacks. So a couple of nice tests here for Brent Pry, and see how he can game plan against him. Along with him in the backfield, they got Jake Funk at running back, another great name. He's really talented as well. He's had a nice year so far. So it'll be interesting to see how Penn State can do in shutting down that run game, shutting down the passing game too. The Terps, they're not the usual, doormat of the Big Ten. I think they're going to be able to put together a nice year here. So offensively, I think there's plenty to worry about for Penn State. Defensively, I think this is going to be one of the weaker defenses they face. So I think a lot of people are going to be ready for Sean Clifford probably to have a bounce back game and get some confidence back. Hopefully Jahan Dotson can, carry that momentum in from the second half against Ohio State and keep balling, keep making circus catches and get on SportsCenter's top 10 plays.
I feel like Maryland has had some pretty good offensive weapons, and since they've joined the Big Ten, I mean, they had Anthony McFarland, who's now in the Steelers, and he had a really good couple games when he was in college against Penn State. So it was never really their offense, other than the fact that they just couldn't get in the end zone. But I feel like their defense is really something that struggles, is a perennial struggle for them. And I think that this year, I mean, obviously they just let up 44 points. So I think that Penn State might be able to overcome their offensive struggles and play against that defense pretty well. But I think that their offense might be a little trickier than we are expecting. So,
yeah, no doubt. I mean, they had they beat them 59-0 last year, or whatever it was, 56-0, something like that. They killed them last year. Don't think that's happening this year. This Maryland team isn't a joke, like I said. I do think Penn State's going to come out with a win, and really what'll be a nice confidence boost. But I think it'll be an entertaining game, no doubt. Nice 3:30 afternoon kickoff. So I'm excited.
Yeah, like you guys have been saying, the past few years, it's not really the question has never been can Penn State beat Maryland. It's been by how much can Penn State beat Maryland. I know last year's game especially kind of went to the annals of my favorite Penn State games ever to watch. My distaste for the University of Maryland has become apparent among some people on Onward State. So last year was definitely a satisfying game to watch. They made this whole hubbub. I don't know if you guys remember last year about, cutting classes on Friday because it was a Friday game, which was a big deal. Having this whole, festival kind of on the Maryland campus. And then, of course, Penn State comes in and smacks them 59-0. So definitely it's going to be a different story this year, as you guys have been saying. So do you guys want to go around and do some quick score predictions and maybe things to look out for?
45. I think Penn State puts up 45 points. I think Maryland gets 20. So not a complete blowout. I'm going to go 45-20 Penn State. I think Penn State kind of controls it throughout, and the offense finally hits its stride. But I think Maryland battles and puts up some points against Penn State's defense. 45-20 is what I'll go.
I'm going to go 48-26 Penn State. I think that Jake Funk, he's coming off 200+ yard game with 2 touchdowns, and I think that Penn State's front seven's going to slow him down. I think that he's going to struggle a little bit, but I still think that our secondary needs some work on defense. I expect our offense to blow up, though, so I'm looking forward to that. Penn State by 22.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit more generous on Maryland. I'm still going to say a Penn State victory, but I think it's definitely going to be a shootout. I'm going to go 35-42 Penn State victory.
Ooh. Okay.
So we're going to see plenty of offense. It's going to be a little different than some of the Big Ten football we're used to, but this should be a good one to watch, I'd say.
We got Maryland coming into Happy Valley next week, 3:30 game on Big Ten Network. Will, thank you so much for coming and chatting some footy with us. As always, we'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks again for having me. Always enjoy talking football with the boys.
That was your episode of Podward State for the week, your football preview. Also be on the lookout for our second collaboration podcast with the Symbiotic Podcast. That should be dropping this week as well. So 2 for the price of 1 this week, folks.
Yep, and this one's coming out on Tuesday, which is election day, so make sure you go out and vote. If you guys need some voting information, we have an episode that talks about how to vote here in State College and on campus. So we will link that in the bio and get out and have your voice heard.
Stay safe out there, folks.